It was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. By late July 1944, the D-Day landings of the Western Allies that had taken place in Normandy on the 6th of June 1944 had been consolidated. Troops and arms were being shipped over to the continent in ever greater numbers. Direct ground attack on the Reich itself was now in prospect. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army, in its massive offensive, Operation Bagration, launched just over a fortnight after D-Day, had smashed through the defences of the Wehrmacht's Army Group Centre, an immense formation of 48 divisions in 4 armies and pivotally placed over a 700-kilometre stretch of the enormous front, inflicting huge losses, and had advanced more than 300 kilometres. To the south, Rome had fallen to the Allies, and German troops were engaged in fierce rearguard fighting near Florence. Meanwhile, ever more German towns and cities were exposed to relentless devastation from the air. With resources and manpower stretched to the limit and hugely inferior to the combined might of the enemy, now forcing back the Wehrmacht from the east, west and south, the writing was on the wall for the Hitler regime. At least, that was how the Western Allies saw it. They were confident that the war would be over by Christmas. Viewed from Germany, it was a different matter. Here, attitudes about the state of the war and Germany's prospects varied widely. Whether at the elite level, among the civilian and military Reich leadership, or among the public on the home front and the millions of men under arms. Defeatism, reluctant acceptance that the war was lost, realistic acknowledgement of overwhelming enemy strength, waning belief in Hitler, and fears for the future were more evident by the day. On the other hand, support for the regime, not just among Nazi fanatics, was still widespread, and many in high places and low still refused to contemplate the prospect of defeat. Their thinking ran along the following lines. The enemy, the unholy coalition of the Western democracies and the Communist Soviet Union, could still be repulsed if the war effort could be revitalized. In the event of a serious reverse, the enemy could split apart. New, devastating weapons were on the way and would bring a sharp turn in war fortunes, and if subjected to significant military setbacks, the Allies would be forced to entertain a settlement, leaving Germany some of her territorial gains and peace with honour. Such thoughts were by no means moribund in the summer of 1944. Among the mass of the population, however, the predominant feeling in mid-July 1944 was one of mounting worry and anxiety. Whatever their carefully couched criticisms of the regime's leaders, including Hitler himself, and in particular of the Nazi Party and its representatives, the great majority of ordinary citizens were still unhesitatingly loyal in their support for the war effort. The mood was anxious, not rebellious. There was no trace of anything similar to the growing unrest that eventually burst into open revolution in 1918, despite Hitler's pathological fixation with the internal collapse of that year. There were contingency plans to cope with the possibility of an uprising by foreign workers, numbering by this time, together with prisoners of war, more than 7 million. But there was no serious expectation of revolution by the German population. Regional reports of the SD, Sicherheitsdienst, security service, indicated an increasingly apprehensive mood, falling to 0 point, producing deep depression and amounting to an anxiety psychosis and creeping panic in the light of the Red Army's advance in the east. There was intense worry about the likely fate of East Prussia. People feared that once on German soil, the Russians would never be forced out. Women, in particular, were profoundly apprehensive. The Eastern Front will probably soon collapse, ran one reported comment. If the Bolsheviks get in, we might as well all hang ourselves with our children. The Führer should make peace with England and America. The war can no longer be won. It was not an isolated sentiment. Though overshadowed by events in the East, attitudes towards the Western Front were also gloomy, with widespread acknowledgement of the enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and resources. There were still hopes of the promised miracle weapons, though earlier exaggerated expectations